Whitman wrote, "The ice storm that winter wasn't generally destructive. True, a few wires came down, and there was a sudden jump in accidents along the highway. Normally, the big walnut tree could easily have borne the weight that formed on its spreading limbs. It was the iron wedge in its heart that caused the damage." The story of the iron wedge began years earlier when the white-haired farmer who now inhabited the property owned where that tree was, he was a lad in his father's homestead. The sawmill had then only recently been moved from the valley, and the settlers were still finding tools and odd pieces of equipment scattered about. On this particular day, it was a faller's wedge, wide, flat, and heavy, a foot or more long, and splayed from mighty poundings, which the lad found in the south pasture. A faller's wedge, used to help fell a tree, is inserted in a cut made by a saw, and then struck with a sledgehammer to widen the cut. Because he was already late for dinner, the young man laid the wedge between the limbs of the young walnut tree his father had planted near the front gate. He would take the wedge to the shed right after dinner, or sometime when he was going that way. He truly meant to, but he never did. The wedge was there between the limbs, a little tight, when he attained his manhood. It was there, now firmly gripped, when he married and took over the father's farm. It was half grown over on the day the threshing crew ate dinner under the tree. Grown in and headed over, the wedge was still in the tree the winter the ice storm came. In the chill silence of that wintry night, one of the three major limbs split away from the trunk and crashed to the ground. This so unbalanced the remainder of the top that it too split apart and went down. When the storm was over, not a twig of the once proud tree remained. Early the next morning, the farmer went out to mourn his loss. Then his eyes caught sight of something in the splintered ruin. "The wedge," he muttered reproachfully, "that I found in the south pasture." A glance told him why the tree had fallen. Growing edge up in the trunk, the wedge had prevented the limb fibers from knitting together as they should. My dear brothers and sisters, there are hidden wedges in the lives of many whom we know. Yes, perhaps in our own families. Let me share with you the account of a lifelong friend now departed from mortality. His name was Leonard. He was not a member of the church, although his wife and children were. His wife served as a primary president. His son served on an honorable mission. His daughter and his son married companions in solemn ceremonies and had families of their own. Everyone who knew Leonard liked him, as did I. He supported his wife and children in their church assignments. He attended many church-sponsored events with them. He lived a good and a clean life, even a life of service and kindness. His family, and indeed many others, wondered why Leonard had gone through mortality without the blessings of the gospel and that which it brings to members. In Leonard's advanced years, his health declined. Eventually, he was hospitalized, and life was ebbing away. In what turned out to be my last conversation with Leonard, he said, "Tom, I've known you since you were a boy. I feel persuaded to explain to you why I have never joined the church." He then related an experience of his parents, which took place many, many years before. Reluctantly, the family had reached a point where they felt it was necessary to sell their farm, and an offer had been received. Then a neighboring farmer asked that the farm be sold to him instead, although at a lesser price. "We've been such close friends. This way I can own the property. I'll be able to watch over it." At length, Leonard's parents agreed, and the farm was sold. The buyer, even the neighbor, held a responsible position in the church. And the trust this implied helped the family to sell to him, even though they did not realize as much money from the sale as they would have had if they were to have sold to the first interested buyer. Not long after the sale was made, the neighbor sold both his own farm and the farm acquired from Leonard's family in a combined parcel which maximized the value and hence the selling price. The long-asked question of why Leonard had never joined the church had been answered. He always felt that his family had been deceived by the neighbor. He confided to me, following our conversation, that he felt a great burden had at last been lifted as he prepared to meet his Maker. The tragedy is that a hidden wedge had kept Leonard from soaring to greater heights.